So welcome. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to talk about one of our new private label programs, and our private label programs were developed to help local test prep and tutoring companies compete with commercial test prep using difference makers or value add programs, or just really cool, good stuff that we know has been effective at a local level. That program for us today is this ACT Math Calculator Fluency program. It's a standalone program, and it's basically, it explains how to use the T84, a couple of the most popular calculators on the ACT Math section. Includes about 60 micro lesson vids, which John is going to take us through here in a moment. 500 practice questions, or really more than 500, and over 50 program downloads. So before we get there, I will tell you about me. I am Kevin Organichek. I founded TPAPT. I've been in test prep and tutoring for about 20 years. I was a P&L manager at Kaplan, a tutoring company, COO, an education franchise president. So I've seen, I think, every business model there is to see, I've seen. And yeah, I love it. I'm also a training tutor, a parent, a spouse, and a sustainability enthusiast. And I'm pleased to be hosting today's call with John Carey. Jonathan Carey is an ACT tutor with, not kidding, over 9,000 contact hours. He's our associate director of online tutoring. He wrote this course. He wrote this calculator fluency course, and we found it and thought, man, it blows everything out of the water that's even close to this right now. And it really confers an advantage to students that know how to use this sort of programming. He enjoys traveling, the outdoors, and rock climbing. And so, John, before I turn it over to you, I want to just, I just want to turn it over to you right now. So you can share your screen.
Perfect. All right, everybody, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us today. Yeah, like Kevin said, I am the author of the program. What I'm going to go ahead and do, I'll give you guys a quick little background on me, kind of lay out the format of what we're trying to achieve today, what I want to walk you guys through, and then we'll be showing you guys some examples and fielding any questions that you might have. So quick background on me, like Kevin said, I have a lot of contact hours. I've done this for a very long time. And in that time, one of the things that I realized, particularly when working in the test prep space, is that not every student's going to be on level playing field coming into things. Certain students have different backgrounds, some have different proficiencies. Not everybody's an absolute rock star at math. And in that process, I learned that one of the biggest defining factors of what helps students be successful on, say, the ACT is how they navigate their time. And in that time working as a test prep tutor, I realized, there are a lot of students who just don't know how to leverage a graphing calculator or a scientific calculator. And when I started thinking about it, I realized, these calculators are allowed to be programmed, and it's totally, test legal and all that stuff. You can do it. People just don't know about it, and they don't know how. They didn't have the resources and the skills. So I made it a goal of mine to learn the coding process and learn the language for the programs and create as many useful value adds that were originally just intended for my students before Kevin and I linked up and realized, hey, we could do a lot of good with this. We could really help a lot of students kind of get on par. And for me, my mission, my goal with doing this is to, let's take that kid who's, maybe had a disadvantaged math background and he's getting a 16 on his diagnostic ACT. If we can move that kid from like a 16 to like a 23 or something and do it with the least headache possible, I'm gonna be elated, because that's a big win for that student. Maybe otherwise, depending on where their skill set is, they might not be able to have achieved that. So that's kind of like the motivation behind building the course and putting it together. And now we're here showcasing it for all of you, because like me, I'm sure you guys have students as well who maybe aren't mathematically gifted. Maybe that's not their absolute skill set, or maybe they're strong scoring students and you just want to make them better. And on your end, being the educator, you're just trying to add more value to your practice and give your students more to work with. So that's kind of what I hope you guys are able to take away from this as well. So let me go ahead and lay out what we're trying to achieve, and then we'll dive into it. So I'm going to talk about the format of the lessons. I'm going to preview the content for you guys. I'm going to show you kind of what you'd be bringing to the table for your students. And then I'll be showing you examples of how all this gets integrated and put together. So as you guys can see from my screen share, this is the home page. This is what we would get if you were logged in as a student. It's the Ultimate ACT Calculator Fluency course. And within this, you're going to scroll down and see that we have broken it into different sections. We have a course introduction, which is some pretty generic information. One of the best parts of this is going to be how to get the most out of this course. I do a video that totally breaks it down and gives students a step-by-step of what they should and shouldn't be doing. Then we move into the disclaimers, the downloads, and additional resources. This is where students actually learn how to put the calculators on, or the programs onto their calculator, as well as accessing some other stuff that we've done for them, like digital flashcards. As part of my practice, I've created about 500 digital flashcards, half of them centered around the programs, the other half just associated with generic math information. I wanted to include that in the program so that you guys or the students who are utilizing this just have more access to more resources. We also have a little component here talking about the ACT calculator policy for those of the people who are not familiar with it, or just want to double check and make sure they feel really comfortable before they utilize these on a test or whatever it might be. Diving into the actual structure of the course, we have three main components here. We have calculator basics, which the entire portion of the calculator basics is designed around helping students learn how to use a graphing calculator. Because most of the students who are coming into this, especially if they're fairly lowish scoring students, they may have never even used one of these calculators, and they're pretty fancy. There's a lot of buttons that do a lot of stuff. So this whole portion is going to help students learn how that works and how to navigate it. After that, they're going to go into the key programs to know. The key programs are basically like the big ones. Like if a student was on a really tight timeline and they had, I don't know, 2 weeks to prepare for their upcoming ACT, and they happen to get this resource, these are the ones that I would focus on because they have the most impact on the test. After the key programs, we're finally going to go into the additional programs, which is the bulk of the entire section. I'd say all the programs, a third of them are essential, 2/3 of them are auxiliary. So that's kind of the layout of the course. What I want to do is go ahead and open one of these and show you guys what you'd be showing your students or what your students would have access to. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up one that says dealing with imaginary numbers. In here, we have an embedded video. I won't play it, but this is a 7-minute video talking all about what your calculator can do to handle questions dealing with imaginaries. Some of us might not even know that that's possible. And then within the lesson, we also have a downloads. Almost every single lesson has a worksheet associated with it. These are worksheets that we've either curated or found online that lend themselves as basically rote practice for students to just get plenty of exposure and repetition. And like Kevin said, there's like well over 500 practice problems in total. So all in all, it's a great value add for students. Now, I want to show you guys an example of kind of what I would maybe cover in one of the videos. So if I were to have opened or downloaded the Imaginaries worksheet, this is what we're going to see. And I want to show you guys how this could, be helpful for a problem like maybe number 36 here. So I'm going to pull up my little emulator. And if I was working with a student and showing them how this is going to work, the vast majority of you guys, especially if we're all math professionals here, we probably know that to do this, you have to do some business of multiplying the top and the bottom by the conjugate, and then doing some reduction, and just there's a lot of steps in solving a problem like this. But I'm not sure if you guys know this, the calculator can do this insanely easily. All we have to do is type a problem like 36 directly into the calculator. So if I just press all the associated buttons, I'm going to go ahead and go 4i divided by, and then the denominator was a -8 minus 7i. Well, we get a pretty terrible looking output. And I tell my students, hey, don't worry about that. I also cover in the videos how to make this output look way more viable like that. So it's -28 over 113 minus 32 over 113i. And this is a great example of a massive time saver. If any of us were probably trying to do this by hand, especially if we weren't using a calculator at all, this would take a ton of time. But the calculator can crank it out in under 20 seconds. And when we're kind of looking at what we're trying to bring to the table for our students, one of the biggest things that I think calculator fluency really does is it just massively speeds you up. And any kind of benefit that we can get from a time perspective is always a win in my book. So this will be an example of something that the calculator can do that just has an innate ability that maybe we didn't even know about. So that's one of the things that we cover in the calculator course. I also want to take the time to show you guys some of the different programs themselves. So the first one I want to show you guys is one that I think is pretty neat. It's a program called Trig Value. And so the whole purpose of the Trig Value program, I'm actually not going to bother hunting it down, but I'll go ahead and just pull up the worksheet. The whole purpose of the Trig Value program is to help students who don't know how to do SOHCAHTOA or right triangle trigonometry. Now, don't get me wrong, These programs are not a replacement for the knowledge. Your students are expected to know all of this stuff. They should be able to do these things by hand, but if the calculator can speed it up, again, not to win in my book. So again, I know a lot of you guys probably know how this works, but I want to show you how a problem like number 10 could be solved very easily. And for me, what really matters is it can be done with much less anxiety for the student. If a student identifies as not a math student or not good at math, or if they have it in their head that this test is harder than it should be, the more things that I can bring to the table to help my students realize, hey, this is attainable, you can do this. Again, in my book, that's a win. So let's just say that we're going to do a problem like number 10 here, and we were trying to solve for the value of x, that opposite side. Students have to be able to realize what program to use, and that's a massive component to this. These programs aren't a fix-all or a cure-all to anything. You still have to have the knowledge and the requisite background. So as educators, we still have to teach that stuff. But again, we're just looking at what we can bring to the table to make it easier for the student. But let's go ahead and say we're going to solve a problem like number 10 here. To do that, we're going to go ahead and find our trig value program. And it's been structured to make it very, very easy for students to realize what's going on. So we have two trig-based programs in the calculator, one called SOHCAHTOA and one called trig value. It's going to ask us, is the angle given? In this particular problem, it is. But hypothetically, if the student said, no, it wasn't, they're going to say, whoa, you're in the wrong program. Go back and use SOHCAHTOA instead. So there's kind of built-in checks to help make sure that if there is ambiguity behind which program to use, your students can be able to figure that out, hopefully pretty easily. Now, we do have an angle for this problem, so I'm going to say, yes, it is. They want to know what is that angle? It's 32. It then goes to asking what side was given. Well, 13 is going to serve as the adjacent side. So we're going to choose 13 or the adjacent. We'll type in 13, and then it's going to give us everything else that we need to know about this triangle. The angle we're working on is 58. The opposite side, which is what we're actually after, is 8.123. And if you need the hypotenuse, it's there as well. Now, as most of us are, educators and have seen the test tons and tons of times over, we all know that there's a very real possibility that the answer choices might have expressions as opposed to numbers. Well, I just teach my students that when this happens, if they are utilizing the program, because maybe the real math is a little tough for them, I would just encourage them, type those answers into the calculator and see what you get. It's again, one of those situations where we're just looking to save them as much time as possible. In a perfect world, I'd rather just teach my students how to do the right triangle trigonometry. But again, this is meant to be something that students can use either on their own or just in supplement to what we're teaching them. So that's the second program I want to show you guys. The next one is one that I am particularly proud of. It's a systems of equations solver, because systems of equations can be a massively time-consuming part of the test. And let me go ahead and show you guys what that would look like. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll through my key programs until I find systems of equations. And actually, since I'm going to show you guys the systems of equations, I want to pause and make a note that the hardest part about systems, as most of us know, is setting them up. So we did make sure to include a video and a lesson in here that really walks students through all the nuances to setting these up, because without being able to set it up, the calculator won't solve it for you. I just want to put a little disclaimer in there. But if I open up the lesson talking about systems of equations, and I go ahead and download that worksheet, I want to just very briefly walk you guys through what this might look like from someone doing it on a calculator. Well, I'll go ahead and take number 16 here. Nothing special about it, but it's the first one I found. And so, as we all know, if we're solving systems, you're probably going to do this either algebraically, most likely, with substitution or elimination. And there's nothing wrong with this, and students should know how to do this. But it's also very time-consuming with a lot of steps and a lot of places where students can go wrong. So by having this into a program, it makes it much, much easier to very quickly roll through this and do these problems very efficiently. So having run the program, it's just going to ask us, what are the coefficients, A, B, and C for this problem? If I'm looking at the first part of number 16, we're going to have 6 for A, -12 for B, and 24 for C. For the second part of the equation, it's going to be -1, -6, and 4. And if I run it, I can see that apparently the point of intersection or the solution to this one is going to be 2, -1. And the way the program was formatted is it's going to give you a decimal component in case the answers are kind of gross. But the second line down will also give you fractions or a cleaner component. So the thing I want to highlight here is, again, just the time-saving potential that this brings to the table. Because anybody who solves a system by hand knows it's absolutely atrocious, especially those rare 3x3 systems. And we have a program for that as well. So 3x3 systems are like pretty much a dumpster fire to have to solve by hand because there's so much work and so many choke points for students to do things incorrectly. Having things like a program to do it, make it easier, just a big time saver. So the last program I think I want to show you guys is one that I find a lot of value in because it really helps us sidestep a particularly complicated topic, being the law of cosines. So as we know, sometimes when students get to the later part of the test, they get really intimidated, especially if they're like an Algebra 2 student or like they're barely in pre-calc and they haven't really seen a whole lot of trigonometry. They can get pretty intimidated by some of the tougher math. Well, I found that those triangle problems can actually really be simplified and boiled down without being terribly difficult. So let me find my worksheet for that one really fast. There it is. And so the law of cosines is something that we want to use for certain styles of triangles, but I know that the more formulas I have to try and have a student keep memorized, the harder it is for them, especially if they're not a gifted math student or they don't feel they are. And so for me, one of the things that I like to do is really encourage them to make heavy use of their calculator so they don't have to memorize all these formulas necessarily. Like I said, your students are responsible for all the knowledge, but as much workaround as we can give them, the better. So let's take a question like number 2 here. We have a side, we have an angle, and we have a side. I help students recognize what kind of a triangle it is. And while those have rules associated with them, we also have programs associated with them. So if I go to all my T programs and I find the triangle side angle side program, all I have to do is type in the values. So side 1 for this problem is going to be 17.7. The angle is going to be 131.9. And the other side is 27.4. Now, I'm going to put this out really fast, but when we hit enter, they are going to have this all labeled so that the missing side, if you needed that, let's say that was the problem with law of cosines, well, it's 41.37. You have an angle opposite, or the angle opposite of side 1, the angle opposite of side 2, and it even calculates the area, which is just using that fancy formula that we probably learned, 1/2 AB, sine C or whatever it is. So the take home here for me, hopefully, is that we can take some very complicated topics and make them feel much more attainable for almost anybody, assuming that they take the time to recognize and learn what each program is responsible for and what types of questions they're used on. And so the way the course goes about trying to address that and help with that is basically just taking the time to include the worksheets, plenty of practice, and then we as educators will step in and kind of fill in any gaps that they might have. So that is largely everything that I wanted to showcase. Kevin, if you have anything to add, I'm happy to have it. Otherwise, I am perfectly good taking on some questions.
Okay, so John, could you click on one of the videos so that people can see like the student experience when they go?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Pretty proud of these guys. So I'm gonna go ahead and mute this. Oh, it is muted. So this is basically what students are gonna see. A nice little graphic, little John in the corner, and talking through the worksheet that's associated with each lesson. And so as we're going through here, I'm working out problems. I'm showing how it's done on the calculator in real time. I'm not just talking about it. And every chance that I get within these programs and within these videos, I'm also adding like additional little nuances to those kinds of problems. So if there's something worth noting, like for example, in this video, it's the system of equations, I make it very clear that the program is only going to operate if you have all your variables on one side and your constants on the other side. So that's a prerequisite for this program to be successful. I go through all of that stuff at every chance that we get.